At sunrise, the HOA taped 11 violations to my gate before I'd even had coffee. HOA stormed my Lakeside lodge just 72 hours after I moved in, demanding I hand over my own home. I didn't know why they wanted my place so badly, but every hour the tension rose, until my SEAL brothers stepped out of a dusty van and flipped the whole fight on its head. If you're ready for a story where justice actually wins, stick with me, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next battle. The wind off Lake Willowcrest carried the kind of cold that settled into the bones, the kind that reminded you exactly where you were. Wyoming, high country, where the air smelled like pine sap and snowmelt even in early fall. I'd been on the dock behind my newly purchased Lakeside lodge, tightening a loose cleat, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Too many tires. Too close together. Too slow to be casual. I looked up just as 5 SUVs rolled to a stop in a neat line on my private road, dust drifting around them like smoke. The first door swung open, and out stepped Bethany Reed, president of the Eagle Ridge Lakeside HOA, wearing a bright pink hiking jacket and a smile sharp enough to cut wire. 4 board members climbed out after her, armed with clipboards. A sheriff's deputy brought up the rear, hand already resting on his belt. I had owned this place, this lodge with its cedar beams, stone fireplace, and 200 feet of shoreline, for exactly 72 hours, 3 days. And not one of these people had so much as knocked to say hello. But here they were, marching down the dock like they owned the place. "Mr. Cole," Bethany called, her voice bright and brittle. "We need to speak with you immediately." I straightened, wiping lake water off my hands. "Morning to you too. Something I can help with?" She stopped 3 feet from me, flipping her clipboard around with theatrical precision. "Yes, several somethings. We've had reports of aggressive behavior, perceived threats, and concerning comments made to your neighbors." I stared at her, blinking once. "Ma'am, I haven't met a single neighbor." Bethany smiled like she'd expected me to say exactly that. "That's part of the issue. People feel unsafe approaching you." Behind her, the board members nodded like vultures agreeing over lunch. The deputy cleared his throat. "Sir, the HOA is claiming you've violated community safety protocols. I'm here to ensure this goes smoothly." I felt my jaw tighten. "This is my land, my lodge, purchased legally, recorded with the county less than a week ago." "Yes," Bethany said, lifting her chin, "but community safety supersedes individual occupancy. Given the severity of the complaints, we're requiring you to vacate the property while the HOA investigates." She extended her hand toward my pocket. Not politely, not cautiously, demanding. "Keys, please." For a moment, the only sound was the lake brushing against the dock pilings. The water glittered with sunlight, reflecting a world that should have been peaceful. My world. The one I thought I'd finally secured after years of military service and even more years trying to find a place quiet enough to think. I didn't move. "You're on private property. You don't have jurisdiction over this lodge." Bethany laughed under her breath. "Oh, Remy, you really should have read the community agreements." I had. Twice. And nothing in those pages gave her power to remove me. But she didn't need real authority. She had a clipboard, a deputy she'd pressured into tagging along, and an audience of board members ready to back whatever story she told. "Violation 1, she said loudly, marking her paper. "Unauthorized dock modifications. Violation 2, aggressive posture during HOA approach. Violation 3, Bethany," I said, forcing my voice calm, "you're making a mistake." "No," she snapped. "You made the mistake when you bought a lodge inside my community without checking with the board first." Her words hit harder than she meant them to, because that didn't make sense. The board members weren't looking at me. They were looking at the lake, at the shoreline, at the inlet where the water fed down toward the valley. One of them even lifted a phone and took a picture. This wasn't about me. This was about the land, the lake, something I didn't yet know. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Cole, let's not escalate this. Just hand over the keys until this gets sorted." "You're trespassing," I replied. "All of you, unless you have a warrant." Bethany stepped closer, so close I could smell the artificial citrus of her perfume. "Remy Cole," she whispered, her smile frozen in place. "You need to understand something. This lodge is temporary. The land is what matters, and we intend to protect it." She said it like a threat wrapped in community-friendly packaging. I felt my pulse slow, not from fear, but from recognition. I'd heard that tone before, overseas, from people who believed paperwork and pressure could do what force couldn't. I stepped back just far enough to make her flinch. "You're done here." Bethany stiffened. "Deputy, remove him." The deputy hesitated, but only for a moment. That was enough. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "You're all on record. I have cameras on the dock, by the gate, at the trail entrance. Everything you've done and said is recorded." Bethany went pale beneath her makeup. I didn't smile, didn't raise my voice, didn't move toward them. I simply said the truth. This lake isn't yours to take. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. Something deeper was happening here. Something bigger than fake violations and inflated HOA egos. Something that made them desperate. Desperate enough to confront a man they'd never met and try to seize a lodge they had no legal claim to. But they had no idea who I was, or who I could call. The board retreated, whispering urgently. The deputy backed away, muttering something about needing to verify paperwork. Bethany kept her gaze locked on the water behind me, not the lodge. And that was when I knew. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't the house. It was the lake. As their vehicles disappeared up the gravel road, I stood alone on the dock, wind hitting my back, the old boards creaking beneath my boots. 72 hours of peace, and then it was already over. Why? That question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Why did the HOA want my lodge and the lake so desperately? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was about to find out. The dust from the HOA convoy hadn't even settled before the whole Lakeside quieted again, leaving only the sound of wind brushing through the ponderosa pines behind the lodge. The water shimmered with the last of the afternoon sun, but the peace felt artificial now, like a blanket stretched over something sharp. I stepped back inside the lodge, closing the heavy cedar door behind me. The place smelled faintly of old timber and linseed oil, that warm scent you only get from cabins that have stood against 40 winters and survived. For 3 days, it had felt like home. Today it felt like a puzzle someone forgot to warn me about. My boots echoed against the hardwood floor as I moved through the living room. Something about Bethany's confidence bothered me. Not the arrogance, but the accuracy. She'd arrived with a sheriff, violations, accusations, and a rehearsed speech. You don't build that kind of show in 72 hours. This had been planned, and planned for me. My eyes drifted toward the far corner, where an uneven board caught the fading light. I'd noticed it the first day but assumed it was just age settling into the floor. Now something pulled me toward it, an instinct I'd learned to trust long before I bought this lodge. I crouched and ran my hand along the planks. One edge lifted beneath my thumb. Loose. Very loose. I worked the board up slowly until it popped free with a soft wooden sigh. Underneath lay a metal box, old, military style, painted forest green but scraped raw in places. A faint metallic smell rose from it, mixing with the dust. My heartbeat didn't speed up, but it deepened, steady, deliberate. I lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked, like it held more than just papers. The latches resisted for a moment, then clicked open. Inside were three things that made the room feel smaller. Rolled water rights maps with red markings. A manila envelope with thick documents. A letter, folded once and sealed with tape. The letter sat on top, addressed in shaky handwriting. Remington Cole, trust no one. The words jarred me, not because of the warning. I'd lived most of my life under warnings, but because whoever wrote it knew my full name. The legal one. Not the name I'd used when I put the bid in for this lodge. Not the one on the mailbox. I set the maps aside and opened the letter carefully. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the ink was sharp. If you're reading this, Remy, it means I didn't finish what I started. They'll come for the lodge first because it's the key. They think the lake belongs to them. They're wrong. Do not trust the HOA. Do not trust the county. Do not trust the sheriff. Use the documents. Use the maps. And above all, do not leave. There was no signature, just a final line. They want the water, not the house. A chill rippled across my shoulders. I leaned back, letting the weight of the words settle. Water rights. That changed everything. In the West, land was one thing, water was another. You could lose land and rebuild a house, but lose water, and everything else dried up. Cattle, crops, power, future. If this lake fed the valley, if this inlet controlled flow downstream, then whoever owned this shoreline could control much more than just a fishing spot. Bethany's fixation suddenly made sense. I unrolled the first map across the table. It was hand-drawn, dated almost 30 years ago. It showed the lake, the inlet, and a series of lines extending down the valley where irrigation ditches and channels supplied dozens of ranches. There were stamps from the state engineer's office, signatures, approvals. And there, circled in red, was my lodge. Not for the structure, for the water intake structure buried beneath it. A small notation read, Priority water rights, 1894 permanent, non-transferable tied to parcel 16B, Lake Lodge. My pulse quickened, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Priority water rights from 1894 were grandfathered, ironclad. Even state authorities couldn't override them. If the lodge sat on the intake valve, then whoever owned this land could control or restrict water to the entire HOA development, and perhaps more. I exhaled slowly. So that was the game. The HOA wasn't trying to push out a newcomer. They were trying to steal a century-old water right, a right that would make any lakeside development dependent on them. A right I now owned. I dug through the manila folder. Inside were violation notices, some old, some recent, notes about harassment, photos of drones hovering near windows, copies of certified letters sent to the county that showing the previous owner had tried to report the HOA, and then the final page, a handwritten journal entry. Marcus won't help me anymore. The HOA got to him. I'm out of time. If I disappear, it won't be an accident. If someone buys this lodge, I pray it's someone who can fight. Someone like you, Remy. I sat back, letting the paper fall to the table. So the sheriff knew, and did nothing. The room felt colder now. Outside, the sun dipped behind the ridge, pulling shadows across the lake like a curtain closing on Act 1. I looked out the window, down toward the shoreline. The inlet pipe was hidden under brush, but from here I could see the disturbance in the water, ripples moving in a way they shouldn't. Someone had been there recently, maybe even today. My hand tightened around the letter. The previous owner had left me a warning and a battlefield, and the HOA didn't just want the lodge, they needed it. Badly enough to lie, badly enough to intimidate, badly enough to twist the sheriff's arm. I folded the maps, placed the documents back in the box, and slid the loose board into place. Whatever this was, It had started long before I arrived, and now it was mine to finish. I stepped outside again. The wind carried faint voices from up the hill, Bethany's people regrouping, planning their next move. They thought they'd scare me off, but they didn't know me, and they didn't know that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin, and I wasn't leaving. But the HOA didn't wait until tomorrow. Before dawn even cracked the ridge, something thudded against my front door hard enough to rattle the hinges. I jerked awake, boots already halfway on, before I realized it wasn't an intruder. It was paper. Lots of paper. The early morning light was cold and blue, washing over the porch as I opened the door. 11 violation notices fluttered against the wood like trapped moths, taped in overlapping rows from eye level to the welcome mat. Improper dock cleats. Grass height exceeds community standards by 1 inch. Unauthorized use of shoreline. Non-compliant mailbox paint shade. Vehicle parking and prohibited orientation. Excessive noise disturbance at 6:42 p.m. I actually laughed. I'd been alone last night. No TV, no music, just the wind and water. But this was no mistake. This was a message. The wind carried the crisp scent of pine and lake water as I pulled the notices down one by one, each paper snapping like a dry twig. The HOA logo looked smug in the weak light, bold black letters that suddenly felt like a threat. Fine totals: $2,150 for a single morning. The sky was barely warming when the next wave came. A buzzing hum, thin but constant, drifted overhead. I stepped into the yard, boots crunching on frost, and looked up to see 2 drones hovering like metal hornets above my roofline. One of them dipped lower, camera pointed straight at me. I lifted a hand and waved. It zipped back up like it had been caught doing something shameful. Not 10 minutes later, a white sedan rolled up the gravel road, one of those county cars with faded lettering and a tired suspension. A man in a reflective vest stepped out, holding a clipboard and a tape measure. "Morning," he said without looking at me. "Received multiple complaints about safety deficiencies here. Electrical, structural, shoreline hazards. Need to inspect." "Where's your warrant?" I asked calmly. He blinked, clearly not expecting pushback. The HOA submitted concerns. That's usually enough." "Not here, it isn't." I stepped forward slowly, keeping my voice steady. "This is private property. No warrant, no inspection." He hesitated, tapped his phone, then gave an annoyed sigh. "I'll report you as non-compliant." "Feel free," I said, opening the county code app on my phone. "But make sure you add the statute I'm citing. Unauthorized entry request without probable cause, Title 18. Section Qua." He held up his hands. All right. I'll come back later." He left in a hurry, tires spitting gravel. The wind picked up again, rustling through dried sage along the driveway. My lodge stood steady in the morning light. But something about the air felt different, charged, unsettled. The first shot had been fired, and the HOA wasn't done. By noon, 3 more inspectors had shown up with similar excuses. One claimed the dock cleats were illegal. Another said my fence needed to be uniform in color. The third, an older man with shaky hands, kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was watching him work. They all left when I asked for paperwork, but the harassment didn't stop. As the sun reached its highest point, I walked down to the shoreline to check the inlet. The lake glittered in the pale gold light, but the ripples near the inlet didn't look natural. The water moved with purpose, like something had been dragged through it recently. I crouched near the waterline, running my fingers along the wet stones. Fresh tracks led from the inlet up toward the tree line. Boot prints, deep, recent. Someone had been here last night. Maybe more than one someone. When I stood, The lodge looked different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I could feel eyes on it, on me. The HOA wasn't just poking around. They were surveilling, cataloging, trying to build a story before I could build my own. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice came through, low and shaky. "Mr. Cole, I shouldn't be calling, but you need to know. You're not the first. The previous owner, he tried to fight them. Then one day, he just left. Or that's what they said." "Who is this?" I asked. Silence. Then the call disconnected. A single dusty pickup rolled down the road right after. The same one I'd seen parked outside the HOA office yesterday. It slowed near my mailbox, then sped off when I stepped toward it. A thin sheet of paper flapped on the ground where the truck had paused. I picked it up. Another notice. Unauthorized vehicle. Parking violation. $300. My own truck, parked in my own driveway. The anger simmered, slow and controlled, settling deep into my chest. They were trying to bury me under nonsense, hoping I'd get overwhelmed and leave. And maybe it had worked on the last owner. But I wasn't him. I stepped into the boathouse to grab a wrench and froze. A brick lay on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass from the broken side window. My stomach tightened as I knelt and picked it up carefully. Rubber banded to it was a note, written in thick black marker. "You were warned. 48 hours. Leave or pay." The lake was silent. Not a ripple. Not a bird call. Not a breeze. Just the weight of the threat settling around me like fog. I wasn't surprised. Not really. But it told me one thing. They were getting desperate. And people who get desperate make mistakes. I walked back into the lodge, shut the door, and set the brick on the table next to the metal box the previous owner had left me. 2 warnings. 2 reminders. 2 invitations to fight. The sun dipped lower, turning the lake copper. I checked the cameras I'd installed that morning. Trail cams, old military-grade units that caught movement from as far as 80 yards. One alert blinked red. Motion detected. Time, 3:42 a.m. Location, shoreline by the inlet. I tapped the screen. There they were. 2 men kneeling near the inlet pipe. One held a metal tool. The other held a flashlight. They worked quickly, glancing over their shoulders, then jogged back up the hill toward the HOA walking path. That was the moment the realization hit me. This was bigger than boundary lines or dock cleats. They were tampering with the water system, the same intake that controlled the valley's irrigation and the HOA's entire Lakeside plan. And the lodge, my lodge, sat on the only legal access point. No wonder they wanted me gone. I stared out at the fading light, at the silhouette of the lake stretching toward the mountains. They thought this campaign of pressure and harassment would break me. They thought wrong. Because tonight, for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, I reached for my phone with a steady hand and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. A number that belonged to someone who didn't need explanations to understand danger. Someone who'd know what to do. The line rang once. "Remy?" A familiar voice answered, gruff and alert. "Haven't heard from you in a long time." I exhaled slowly. "I need backup." A breath of silence, then, "On my way." The lake darkened, the wind shifted, and somewhere in the trees above the lodge, a twig snapped under unseen footsteps. The fight had started, and I wasn't alone anymore. But the HOA wasn't wasting a second either. The morning after the brick came through my boathouse window, the wind off Lake Willowcrest carried a bite sharper than usual, carrying the smell of wet cedar and cold stone. I stepped outside to the porch, the boards groaning softly beneath my boots, and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. But the air felt watched. The brick sat on my dining table. Its message burned into my thoughts. 48 hours. Leave or pay. I had no intention of doing either. I spent the early hours walking the perimeter, checking cameras, making sure the inlet system was untouched since last night's trail cam footage. The lake glimmered under thin clouds, a sheet of brushed steel. Every gust of wind rippled across the water like a warning. It was 9:13 a.m. when I heard the crunch of tires. Not a convoy this time, just a single truck, the sheriff's department logo fading along the side. Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped out slowly, boots landing heavy on the gravel. He wasn't a tall man, but he carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. He looked tired, worn, uncomfortable, the kind of man caught between law and politics. "Morning, Remy," he said. "Sheriff?" He shifted his weight, rubbing the back of his neck. "I got another complaint from the HOA. Says you threatened one of their inspectors yesterday." "Inspector showed up without a warrant," I said evenly. "He left when I asked for one. That's not a threat. It's the law." Marcus looked past me toward the lake. His eyes lingered on the inlet area for half a second too long. Not casual interest. Recognition. Knowledge. The previous owner was right. Marcus knew exactly what was at stake. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "Bethany's putting a lot of pressure on me. She's claiming you're interfering with community utilities, causing safety issues. Says she's got documentation." "What documentation?" I asked. "A file of violations." I held up the stack I'd collected this morning. "These?" He frowned. Those weren't in the report." "That's because they were taped to my door before sunrise." He swallowed hard, eyes darting from the brick visible through the window back to the lake. For a moment, just a flicker, his expression shifted. Something like guilt or fear. "You should reconsider leaving," Marcus muttered. "Just until things calm down." "I'm not leaving my land," I said, "and I'm not letting them tamper with a water system they don't own." His head snapped toward me. "You don't know anything about that." "I know enough." Marcus's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "Remy, there are things you're not aware of. Things you don't understand about this place." "I understand they were down at the inlet at 3:42 this morning," I said. "Caught on camera." His face went pale. "Cameras?" he whispered. "More than one." He looked around, not at me, but at the woods, as if expecting someone to be listening. Then he stepped back and cleared his throat, snapping back into official posture. "I'll file your response," he said stiffly. "Just keep things calm, all right?" He turned to leave, already retreating, but not fast enough to hide the tremor in his hands. Once he was gone, I grabbed my tools and headed for the boathouse. If the HOA wanted to escalate, I'd be ready. I replaced the shattered glass panel, installed a reinforced lock, and positioned the cameras to get clear angles of every path leading toward the inlet. The wind kicked up, carrying dust along the shoreline. The lake's surface shimmered in uneasy patterns. Something about the entire valley felt off, like pressure before a storm. I took a breath, steadying myself, and walked back inside. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. I opened the metal box again, pulled out the oldest map, and traced the water rights boundary lines with my finger. The notation confirming my ownership wasn't just legal, it was ironclad. Priority rights from 1894 were unbreakable. Bethany had to know. Jake Mercer definitely knew. That's why they were rushing. That's why they were desperate. Because if I stayed, they lost everything. My phone buzzed. Unknown number again. This time I answered without hesitation. "Remy?" the voice on the other end asked. Deeper than last night's call. Steady. Familiar. Gideon, where are you? Wyoming. Lakeside Lodge. Trouble. Say no more, he replied. Diesel's in. Ranger too. We're leaving now. I let out a slow breath. ETA? Dawn. That was all he said. All he needed to say. I checked the clock. It was barely noon. Dawn was hours away, but the knowledge that my brothers were coming brought tension and relief in a strange, balanced wave. Not safety. No one could guarantee that. But readiness. I spent the next several hours installing more cameras, reinforcing locks and studying the documents in the metal box. The handwriting, the careful notes, the warnings. They weren't paranoia. They were a legal roadmap of everything the HOA had done wrong, everything they were trying to hide. By sunset, the air tasted metallic, tension hanging thick as the clouds gathered over the ridge. Orange light spilled across the lake, long shadows stretching from the pines like fingers reaching for the water. I stepped onto the dock, letting the boards groan under my weight. The wind brushed past me, colder than it had been earlier, carrying the faint scent of dust and something else. Engine oil? I turned. A vehicle sat at the top of my driveway. No lights, no movement. Then it rolled forward slowly, crunching gravel under tires. A black SUV, windows tinted dark. It paused by the mailbox, headlights still off. A figure stepped out. Tall, hood up. Could have been anyone. But the way he moved, quick, purposeful, told me he wasn't delivering mail. He walked to the boathouse, bent down, and placed something beneath the corner. Then he turned and sprinted back to the SUV, which peeled away into the twilight. I approached cautiously, the wind whipping colder now. Under the boathouse corner, half hidden in the dirt, was a small metal box, newer than the one inside. Clean, deliberate. I lifted it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper. 24 hours. Final warning. I looked out over the lake, the sky darkening, clouds gathering like a curtain ready to drop. They wanted me shaken. They wanted me out. They wanted me alone. But they had miscalculated. Because dawn was coming. And with it, so were my brothers. The sky over Lake Willowcrest shifted from black to deep blue long before the sun itself touched the horizon. A cold wind swept across the water, carrying the smell of morning frost and wet pine. I stood on the dock, hands in my jacket pockets, watching the last of the night shadows bleed into the lake's surface. That silence, the kind you only get in the mountains before sunrise, began to break. A distant engine. Steady. Heavy. Not HOA. Not county. Not a stranger. A dusty white rental van rounded the bend in the gravel road, headlights off, moving slow and deliberate. The van rolled to a stop beneath the tall lodge pines, tires crackling against last night's thin layer of ice crystals. The passenger door opened first. Gideon Pierce stepped out, tall and lean, wearing a forest green jacket and carrying a laptop bag slung tight across his back. He scanned the tree line before even acknowledging me, a habit he'd never broken from our days overseas. "Perimeter's quiet," he called, voice low. Next came Diesel Harper, broad-shouldered, dark beard trimmed close, eyes sharp. He wore a gray hoodie with the faint outline of Harvard Law on the front. Only Diesel could go from breaching buildings overseas to arguing statutes in a federal courtroom. Last was Ranger Holt, the medic. Heavy boots, calm eyes, same quiet energy as always. He moved with the careful steps of a man who'd learned to live in dangerous silence, even in peacetime. I walked up the path to them, the frost crunching under my boots. Ranger wrapped me in a quick, solid hug. Diesel clapped my shoulder. Gideon just nodded, but that nod meant more than most people's speeches. "You look like hell," Diesel said. HOA harassment will do that, I replied. He snorted. Buddy, you didn't call us for lawn care citations. What's the real situation? I motioned them toward the lodge. Inside. You need to see what they're after. We stepped in through the cedar door. The warmth from last night's fireplace lingered faintly, mixing with the scent of coffee I'd brewed an hour earlier. The men set their bags down and moved to the dining table, where I had everything laid out. Water rights maps, violation notices, photos from the trail cams, the metal box from beneath the floor, the letter from the previous owner, the brick with its threatening message. Gideon's eyes narrowed as he sifted through the documents. Diesel flipped through the manila folder quickly, scanning legal terminology with the focus of a man hunting for actionable code violations. Ranger traced the red-marked water lines on the century-old map. It was Gideon who spoke first. Remy, this isn't an HOA scheme. He tapped a finger on the inlet circled in red. This is a resource control operation. Diesel nodded. And the violations? These aren't random. They're coordinated. Paper harassment to establish a pattern for forced removal. Ranger picked up the brick, turning it over. Same pattern used overseas when local militias wanted leverage on landowners. I poured coffee for each of them. They want the water, or control of it. The inlet sits on lodge property. Owning this lodge means owning first rights to lake flow. And by owning first rights, Diesel added, you decide how much water reaches the HOA development downstream, which means you choke them or bless them. No wonder they're scared of you. Gideon set up his laptop on the table, wires snaking across the wood. I'm going into their systems. HOA servers first, then any connected devices. Won't they see you? Ranger asked. Gideon shot him a thin smile. They never do. Within minutes, the screen lit with multiple camera feeds, some from the HOA's public paths, others from private devices Gideon had already exploited. How many access points do they have? I asked. Too many, he replied. But they're sloppy. They don't expect real opposition. Diesel leaned back in his chair. Remy, this whole thing smells like a setup to claim eminent domain. They fabricate violations, declare your lodge unsafe, get county inspectors involved, and bam, forced vacation of the property. And once I'm out? I said. They strip the inlet, Diesel replied. Build over it. Claim water rights by occupancy. Seen it before, just not with an HOA. Ranger stood and looked out the window toward the water. The lake reflected the brightening sky, gold streaks cutting across the surface. How long before they move again? He asked. Based on last night? I said. Hours, maybe less. As if on cue, a soft buzzing filled the air. A drone. Gideon walked to the window. 2 o'clock high, he murmured. Commercial model, weak encryption. He typed quickly. The buzzing stopped mid-air. The drone wobbled, froze, and then drifted downward like a leaf in slow motion. It landed softly in the snow-dusted grass. Captured, Gideon said. Let's see who's spying. Diesel exhaled. These folks have no idea what they just walked into. I grabbed my jacket. Let's check the drone. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. The lake was waking up now, wind rippling across its surface, whispering against the dock ropes. The drone sat half buried in frosty grass. I picked it up and turned it over. Gideon was already scanning the memory card with a portable reader. The small screen lit up with videos. Clips of my lodge, my truck, my dock, even recordings from last night's boathouse area. But one clip made all of us stop. A video from an HOA walkway. Jake Mercer, the contractor who worked with Bethany, speaking on the phone. If we can't push him out today, we move to phase 2. Yes, I know the deadline. Yes, the inlet. Don't worry, we'll remove the obstruction once the lodge is empty. Diesel's voice tightened. Obstruction? They're planning to tamper with the water system. Ranger rubbed his jaw. They already did. Twice. And they're escalating, I said quietly. Gideon nodded. They'll hit you again fast, before you get attorneys involved. They need you gone before the county reviews anything. Well, Diesel said, standing and stretching his shoulders. Lucky for you, you already have an attorney. You sure? I asked. He smirked. Remy, you think I drove 8 hours for the scenery? Ranger clapped me on the back. We've got you. I felt the tension in my chest loosen. Not gone, but tempered, strengthened, reinforced by the people who knew how to stand at my side when storms came. And storms were definitely coming. We went back inside as the sun finally crested the ridge, flooding the lake with golden light. Gideon refreshed his feeds. Heads up, HOA cameras show movement near the common area. Vehicles gathering. How many? I asked. 3 SUVs. Looks like they're prepping for something. Diesel grabbed the violation stack. Then we'll prep too. Ranger checked the door locks. What's the play? I looked out at the lake, feeling the first real spark of resolve ignite deep in my chest. Simple, I said. We let them make their move. And when they do? I nodded toward the metal box of legal documents, the trail cam footage, and the hacked drone videos. We hit them with the truth. Gideon's laptop beeped sharply. Remy, you need to see this. He turned the screen toward us. A message popped up on the HOA server feed, sent from Bethany Reed's account. Emergency HOA meeting. Tonight, mandatory attendance. Mandatory. Primary agenda. Removal of Remington coal from Lakeside Parcel 16B. The cold wind pressed against the windows. The lake rippled darkly. Ranger exhaled slowly. It's starting. Diesel looked at me. You ready? I nodded once, because dawn had arrived, and so had my brothers. By late afternoon, the lake had settled into an uneasy stillness, the wind brushing long ripples toward the inlet like fingers warning of what was coming. Gray clouds were building over the distant ridge, hanging low enough to touch the treetops, promising a storm, or something worse. Inside the lodge, Gideon's laptop screens lit the dim living room with shifting camera feeds. Diesel sat at the dining table flipping through HOA bylaws, marking sections with sticky notes. Ranger checked the exterior one more time, making sure every camera we'd set earlier had a clear line of sight. The digital clock on the wall beeped twice. 6:00 p.m. The HOA's emergency meeting was in 1 hour. Movement, Gideon said, leaning forward. Bethany just sent a broadcast message to all HOA residents. Wants full attendance, no exceptions. Diesel snorted. She's scared. When tyrants rush, it means their plan is cracking. Ranger stepped back inside, shaking the cold from his jacket. Roads filling up with SUVs. Folks look nervous. I tightened my jacket zipper and looked out through the tall windows. The lake reflected the clouds now, dark, heavy, stretched across the water like bruises. A pine branch tapped the glass in the strengthening wind, rhythmic and foreboding. They think tonight will break me, I said quietly. If they can turn the whole neighborhood against me, they believe I'll leave on my own. Diesel stacked the documents neatly. Then let's make sure the opposite happens. Gideon's voice cut through the room again. Remy, you should see this. He tapped a key, and the largest screen filled with footage from a walking trail camera. Bethany Reed stood with Jake Mercer and 3 board members, speaking in harsh whispers. A folded paper was in her hand, a printed agenda for tonight. I leaned in as Gideon increased the volume. He'll be removed tonight, Bethany said, her tone clipped. The vote will be unanimous once they see the footage. Sheriff Hale will escort him off the property. Jake nodded. And the inlet? Handled after he's gone, she answered. We need him off the lodge before Monday. The investors expect the survey report by then. Board member Clark spoke nervously. You said he'd be easy to intimidate. He's not leaving. Bethany's jaw tightened. He will, or will give the county enough complaints that they'll force an emergency inspection. Either way, the lodge becomes community property. Diesel muttered under his breath. Not how property law works, but nice try. I exhaled slowly. Time to go. Ranger looked at me. You going alone? That's the plan. I grabbed my coat, slipping the printed water rights map into the inner pocket. I'm not showing up with backup hiding behind me, but stay nearby, no visibility. Copy that, Gideon said. We'll be in the trees. The lodge door creaked softly as I stepped into the fading daylight. The smell of rain seeped into the wind, sharp, metallic. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the Lakeside pavilion down the shoreline path. The further I went, the louder the murmur of voices became. By the time I reached the pavilion, 50 people were gathered beneath the string lights flickering under the cloudy sky. Kids stood behind parents. Elderly couples whispered. A few men crossed their arms, scowling in my direction. Many people avoided eye contact entirely. Fear, misinformation, manipulation, all baked into the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Bethany stood front and center on the small wooden stage, wearing her pastel blazer, hair perfectly pinned, smile polished into something that could have belonged in a magazine ad, if not for the way it never reached her eyes. When she saw me, the smile widened into something predatory. Mr. Cole, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, thank you for joining us. I trust you're prepared to address your concerning behavior. A hush fell across the crowd. People parted just enough for me to walk toward the front. I stopped 3 rows back. You called a mandatory meeting to discuss me. So let's discuss. A murmur rustled through the group. Bethany clasped her hands delicately, as though she were about to deliver a sermon. Neighbors, she began, we have gathered here tonight because a dangerous situation has arisen in our community. A situation involving Mr. Remington Cole. Several people turned to look at me with uncertain eyes. Over the past 72 hours, Bethany continued, we've received numerous reports of threatening conduct, trespassing, and aggressive refusals to comply with community standards. That's not true, a voice called from the back, but it was drowned out by others whispering nervously. Bethany nodded to Jake Mercer, who lifted a small projector remote. And now, she said with dramatic softness, for your safety, I must show you the evidence. She clicked the remote. A screen lowered from the pavilion's beam, its surface rippling slightly in the wind. The projector hummed alive. A shaky video appeared. Grainy, dark, taken from an angle that suggested someone had been hiding behind the HOA trail fence. In it, I was walking across my property carrying a toolbox. Bethany spoke over the footage. Notice the aggressive posture. Notice the object in his hand. It's a wrench, someone muttered. Bethany ignored them. Which he used to intimidate an inspector. That's false, I said calmly. Your inspector had no warrant. She clicked again. Another clip. This time a slowed-down video of me picking up the brick in my boathouse. Bethany paused it dramatically. As you can see, he staged this incident himself, the crowd gasped. Not because of what she said, but because the screen flickered. Every light in the pavilion blinked at once. A hush swept across the group. Bethany clicked again, flustered. That's not... Jake, fix the... The screen went black, then gray, then filled with a new image, a high-resolution aerial shot from a drone. Gideon's voice crackled faintly through the speakers. Not loud, not intrusive, just calm enough to cut through the tension. Good evening, everyone. Bethany froze. Jake's face drained of color. I didn't move. The screen divided into 4 sections. Top left, HOA contractors kneeling by the inlet at 3:42 a.m. Top right, Jake Mercer carrying tools toward my shoreline. Bottom left, audio waveform labeled HOA board call, Tuesday. Bottom right, time-stamped map showing the inlet connection to the lodge property. Gasps spread through the crowd as the audio began to play. Bethany's voice filled the pavilion. "We remove him tonight, then secure the inlet. Investors want the water rights before the survey." Someone shouted, What is this?" Another resident stepped closer to the screen. "Bethany, you said this was trespass cleanup." Bethany snapped, "This is fake. It's fabricated." But the screen changed again, playing crystal-clear footage from the HOA walking path. Jake Mercer speaking on the phone saying, "Phase 2 begins tonight." The crowd erupted with shocked voices. Bethany's composure shattered, panic flashing across her face. "Stop this!" she shrieked. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" But the screen kept rolling. Emails, maps, drone clips, tampering videos, manipulated violation logs. 3 years of their operation laid bare. And behind me, barely audible over the storm winds rolling in, Ranger's voice whispered through my comm. "Remy, you're gonna want to turn around." I did. And what I saw changed everything. Standing at the edge of the pavilion, framed by the rising storm clouds and the last threads of daylight, was Sheriff Marcus Hale, flanked by 3 men in dark jackets marked with the state seal. They weren't locals. They weren't HOA lapdogs. They were state investigators. The crowd's murmuring stopped all at once, silenced by the authority walking toward us. Thunder rolled across Lake Willowcrest, echoing through the pines as the men stepped beneath the pavilion roof. Bethany froze, half-turned, mouth open, as though the words she wanted to say refused to come out. Jake Mercer took a small step backward, eyes flicking toward the parking lot as if considering escape. Marcus didn't look at them. He looked at me. And in that one moment, under gray stormlight, with the lake wind cutting cold between us, I saw the truth in his expression. Guilt, regret, and something else. Resolve. "Mr. Cole," Marcus said, voice steady, "these investigators would like to speak with you." The crowd parted for them like a river splitting around a rock. A tall investigator stepped forward, flipping open a badge wallet. "I'm Investigator Reese, Wyoming Department of Natural Resources." He motioned toward the screen, still showing the inlet tampering. "We've been examining reports of unauthorized water manipulation in this area for months." Behind him, another state investigator, Stanton, spoke, looking directly at Bethany. "And we now have confirmation of criminal activity." Bethany's face twisted. "You can't just walk in here and make accusations. This is an HOA meeting, a private gathering under community bylaws." "Ma'am," Reese said calmly, "your bylaws end where state law begins." The screen flickered again. Gideon had switched feeds, showing new footage. Encrypted files he'd pulled from HOA servers. Emails between Bethany and Jake discussing water leverage, Phase 2, and quietly integrating Parcel 16B. Residents surged forward, voices rising in confusion and outrage. "You said this was about safety. You lied to us, Bethany. You tried to take his property? My family's water comes from that inlet. Why would you do this?" Bethany stepped onto the stage, hands shaking as she grabbed the microphone. "Everyone calm down. This is a setup. The footage is manipulated." "No," Gideon's voice boomed through hidden speakers, smooth and unshakable. "The footage is backed up in 12 separate encrypted locations. Signed, time-stamped, and traceable." Lightning cracked behind the pavilion, illuminating the lake in a blinding flash. Then the screen changed again, this time showing a recording none of us had heard yet. Bethany's voice, clear, cold, unfiltered, speaking during a private call. "Once we control Parcel 16B, the water rights are ours. The lodge is sentimental nonsense. It's the inlet that matters. Cole won't last. Push him out by any means necessary." A man's voice followed. Jake's, unmistakable. "And if he fights back? We ruin him." The crowd went silent. Not a whisper, Not a breath, just the storm gathering above and the quiet devastation settling in below. Diesel stepped out from between the trees at the back of the pavilion, approaching slowly but confidently. The residents parted for him instinctively. He stood next to me and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. For anyone wondering, yes, this meeting is being recorded. Yes, everything shown here is legal evidence. And no, Mr. Cole has not broken a single law. Meanwhile, your HOA board is in violation of at least 7 Wyoming state codes. Bethany pointed at Diesel, shaking. Who are you? You don't belong here. Diesel flashed his credentials. Elias Harper, former U.S. Navy, now licensed attorney in Wyoming, and Remy Cole's legal counsel. A loud gasp swept through the pavilion. Bethany tried to step back, but the stage ended behind her, forcing her to stop abruptly. Her voice frayed at the edges. This is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect the community. Protect? Diesel repeated. By trespassing? By tampering with a state-regulated water inlet? By coercing the sheriff? By attempting to illegally seize private property? We... Her voice cracked. She was cornered, and she knew it. Marcus finally stepped forward. His voice was low, but every syllable carried weight. Bethany Reed, you lied to me. You used my office to intimidate residents and cover up your crimes. I won't be part of it anymore. She stared at him in horror. Marcus, you owe me. I owe the law, he snapped. The storm broke overhead. Rain fell hard, pounding the pavilion roof like 1,000 small drumbeats. Gideon's voice came once more through the speakers. Calm, final. Everything you see is backed up in 14 places now. Even if you pull the plug, even if you shut down every HOA device, this information already lives far beyond your reach. The screen turned to one last image, a heat map overlay showing every time and location HOA members had trespassed on my property over the past week. The lake glowed red in all the wrong places. Bethany's knees buckled. Jake took another step back, face gone white. I felt Ranger move into position behind me, silent, steady, watching the crowd for any sudden moves. Residents turned on the board members, voices rising like the storm itself. You lied to us. You endangered our water supply. You threatened him. Why? We trusted you. You almost cost us everything. The chaos built, but I stayed still, because Sheriff Hale was watching me now. Not with guilt this time, with resolve, with purpose, with the weight of someone who had decided to finally speak the truth. He stepped forward once more, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Remy, he said quietly, you're going to want to hear what comes next. The pavilion fell silent again. The storm hung heavy, and the next chapter of this fight was about to begin. The pavilion lights flickered as the wind pushed rain sideways across the lake, the sound of it rattling the tin roof above us. Folks huddled closer together, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself was waiting for something to break. Sheriff Marcus Hale didn't stand on the stage. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped into the open center of the pavilion, the way a man does when he's ready to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. Everyone listen, he said, the words steady but weighed down. What I'm about to say, I should have said a long time ago. People turned. Someone in the back whispered his name like a plea. Bethany Reed stood frozen near the stage steps, her eyes wide and unblinking. Marcus took a breath that shook a little, then continued. I've been sheriff of Willowcrest County for 15 years, and in those 15 years, I've seen small-town politics get messy, but I've never seen anything like what's happened around this lake. His jaw tightened. 3 months ago, Bethany Reed came to my office. She told me she had security concerns about a property owner near the inlet. That man was the prior lodge owner, Tom Carver. A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus nodded toward the screens that still flickered with evidence. She said he was causing trouble, said homeowners felt unsafe. I didn't know then that she'd already started falsifying documents, paying for signatures, spreading rumors. He looked down at his hands. I issued warnings based on her reports, and I regret that. But when I started digging deeper, people stopped talking to me. County staff avoided questions. And one night, I found my own deputy shredding HOA paperwork after hours. You could have heard a raindrop hit the dock. Marcus continued, voice lower now. I tried to push back, quietly at first. I asked Bethany to show me where she got her information. She told me to stick to the script. And when I didn't, his eyes hardened. She threatened to ruin me. The pavilion stirred again. Someone whispered, "My God." Marcus nodded, as if confirming it. She knew my son needed medical equipment that insurance wouldn't cover. She knew my wife was struggling. She said she could help, or she could make the next election ugly. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with shame. And I took the help. I told myself I was doing it for my family. But I was wrong. I should have stood up sooner. Bethany suddenly lurched forward. Marcus, stop! You're lying. I never... Diesel stepped between them, raising a hand. Not in threat, just a warning. She quieted instantly. Marcus lifted his chin. I'm done covering for anyone. Not for this HOA. Not for Jake Mercer. Not for any county official who lined their pockets while residents suffered. He turned toward me. And I'm damn sure not letting them do to you what they did to Carver. For a moment, all I heard was the storm, wind over water, rain slapping the pavilion floor, thunder rolling like distant drums against the mountains. Then Investigator Reese stepped forward. Sheriff Hale has been cooperating with state authorities for the last 2 weeks. We've been building a case against this HOA's leadership, and tonight's evidence confirms the final piece. The crowd erupted again. Not with anger this time, but shock, betrayal, hurt. My business, did they? Were our dues stolen? She took our lake access money? Is that why our water bill doubled? Reese raised a hand. Yes, we found misappropriated funds, over $230,000 across 3 years. Bethany let out a strangled sound, half gasp, half denial. Rain streaked down her face as she backed against the stage, makeup smearing like ink on wet paper. Jake looked worse, like a man watching his freedom slip through his fingers. Diesel, standing beside me, leaned in slightly. This is where it turns. From the back of the pavilion, Gideon's voice carried through every speaker again. To the residents of Willowcrest, your HOA is being investigated under Wyoming State Code for fraud, coercion, misuse of funds, and unlawful interference with water infrastructure. You'll receive official notice within 72 hours. The screen switched to another set of files. Bank transfers, signatures, maps of illegal boundary expansions Bethany had orchestrated. Each one was a nail in the coffin of her power. The residents' anger shifted now, from confusion toward unity. Why would you do this? We trusted you, Bethany. My mother lost her property because of your violations. You put our water supply at risk, Bethany broke. I was trying to save this community, she screamed through tears, voice cracking. You people don't know how to run anything. You needed guidance, structure, order. I kept this lake from collapsing into chaos. Reese stepped closer. Ma'am, that's enough. She shook violently, pointing at me. This man, this outsider, ruined everything. I didn't have to say a word. The truth had already spoken for itself. Marcus adjusted his hat, rain dripping off the brim. Ma'am, this man followed the law. You didn't. The storm punctuated his words with a crack of thunder that lit the entire pavilion white. Reese turned to me one final time. Mr. Cole, thank you for your cooperation. We'll need you to provide formal statements, but your rights to your property and water access are fully protected under state law. I nodded, the weight lifting from my chest for the first time since moving in. But before the moment could settle, an engine rumbled in the distance. Then another. Headlights broke through the trees. Engines grew louder. Boots hit wet gravel. Marcus exhaled a long, heavy breath. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess the Attorney General didn't want to wait." The next wave of justice had arrived. Engines growled through the storm as a convoy of state vehicles rolled down the gravel road and stopped just feet from the pavilion. Red and blue lights washed over the lake, reflecting off the rain-stirred surface like scattered embers. Doors swung open in unison, and boots splashed through muddy puddles. Attorney General field agents stepped out in dark raincoats, their badges catching the glow of the pavilion lights. Their arrival didn't need an announcement. Everyone felt the weight shift the second they appeared. The lead investigator, a tall woman with gray streaks in her hair and calm, razor-sharp eyes, stepped into the pavilion. "I'm Deputy Attorney General Laura Haynes. Effective immediately, the Willowcrest HOA board is under state seizure." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Bethany Reed stumbled backward, her breath hitching. "You can't do this. This is a private organization." Haynes didn't blink. Not when it engages in fraud, coercion, and misuse of state-regulated water infrastructure. Gideon quietly leaned to me. "She's quoting Section 15.3.421. That's the one Diesel found earlier." Diesel nodded, arms crossed, rainwater dripping off his jacket. Two agents approached Bethany. "Mrs. Reed, please step forward." She clutched her clipboard like a life preserver. "This is a misunderstanding. These men," she pointed at me and my brothers, "they hacked us, falsified evidence." Haynes raised a hand. "Ma'am, we obtained court-approved warrants based on independent verification. All evidence gathered tonight has been authenticated. You are under arrest." Bethany's voice cracked into a desperate shriek. "I was protecting this community!" But the rain drowned her words as two agents guided her toward the edge of the pavilion. Jake Mercer tried slipping behind a column, hoping the storm would hide him. But Ranger stepped into his path with the calm of a man who'd been through darker nights. "Not this time, Jake." Agents closed in from both sides. Jake's bravado evaporated. "I didn't do anything. I was just following HOA orders." Haynes's expression didn't soften. "Mr. Mercer, you facilitated illegal boundary expansions, planted falsified property claims, and attempted to interfere with state-protected water structures." Jake sagged as cuffs clicked around his wrists. The storm rolled overhead in long, low growls as the rest of the corrupt board members were escorted forward. Two inspectors, the treasurer, and the HOA's so-called compliance specialist. For a moment, it felt like the entire pavilion exhaled, finally, after days of pressure. Then Haynes turned to me. "Mr. Cole, we've concluded a preliminary review of your ownership records." She held up a laminated page inside a protective sleeve. "Your deed is valid. Your senior water rights are intact. And this lodge was never, in any capacity, under HOA authority." A fresh wave of murmurs swept across the crowd. Shock, relief, realization. I nodded. "Thank you." Behind me, Diesel whispered, "This is where the dam breaks, brother." And he was right. Because as the AG team began reading formal charges, residents found their voices, voices that had been silenced, shamed, or bullied for years. My husband was fined for a fence they said was too tall. They doubled our dues with no vote. She threatened to evict me for parking my truck near the cul-de-sac. We were scared to speak out. Some cried. Others trembled. Many simply stared at Bethany as she was led away, realizing the fear she wrapped around this community had finally been cut loose. The storm slowed into a heavy drizzle, the lake's surface calming as if the water itself had been waiting for this. Haynes signaled to two more agents. "Secure all HOA documents. Every ledger, every email archive, every access card. This entire organization is suspended pending state receivership. Diesel stepped forward, wiping rain from his brow. Ma'am, if you need copies of digital evidence, we've organized it by time frame and statute. Gideon has redundancy partitions ready. Gideon lifted a waterproof hard case. 12 copies, 3 encrypted. All yours. Haynes's eyes widened, not in intimidation, but in respect. You men did the state a favor tonight. Ghost, somewhere in the shadows, murmured, "We try." As the pavilion emptied, state vehicles loaded with the accused and stacks of seized evidence, the atmosphere shifted again, not tense, not relieved, but something in between. Like the moment after lightning strikes, when the air is still buzzing, but the danger has passed. Sheriff Hale, no longer hunched under the weight of secrets, removed his hat and faced the community. "I failed you. That won't happen again." A resident stepped forward, an older woman, hair soaked, voice shaking. "Sheriff, all that matters is you stood up when it counted." Marcus nodded, eyes glistening. "From here on out, the lake is protected. Your homes are protected. This community is going to rebuild the right way." Ranger clapped him on the shoulder. "Good men fix their mistakes. You did that today." As the storm clouds finally broke and the first hint of moonlight touched the lake, Gideon tapped my arm. "Remy, you might want to look at this." He turned his tablet toward me. On the screen was a heat map reading from the far side of the lake. Activity logs, timestamps, signatures. It wasn't just the HOA. There was something else, something bigger, something that explained why Bethany fought so hard. "The map," Gideon said quietly, "shows attempted rerouting of water flow from a secondary inlet. Someone was preparing to divert the lake." My jaw tightened. Diesel leaned in. "That's no HOA play. That's development-level planning." Gideon nodded. "And there's a name attached." The screen zoomed. A signature appeared at the bottom of a digital blueprint. Not Bethany's. Not Jake's. Not anyone from Willowcrest. I recognized it instantly. A name I'd hoped never to see again. The next chapter of this fight wasn't about HOA territory anymore. It was about the future of the entire lake. And dawn was closer than any of us thought. The storm had finally broken by the time we made it back to the lodge. The clouds thinned into drifting sheets of silver mist, letting moonlight spill across the water like a calm breath after days of holding it in. The lake had endured the worst of the fight, just like we had, and now rested in a quiet lull, the kind only Wyoming can give after a storm. Inside, the wood stove crackled low, warming the lodge with that deep, earthy smell of burning pine. My brothers settled onto chairs and couches, exhaustion carving the edges of their faces. But there was something else there, too. Relief, purpose, a sense that the job was finally done. But I couldn't rest. Not yet. I stood at the big picture window overlooking the lake, the glass still peppered with raindrops, and replayed everything Gideon had shown me. The blueprint, the signature, the attempted water diversion. A scheme that would have drained half the lake and reshaped the shoreline for a private resort. Bethany hadn't been the architect. She'd been the pawn. The real mastermind had already been picked up by state agents, thanks to the AG team connecting the rerouting plans to a development firm under investigation. And with that final arrest, the entire operation collapsed. By sunrise, the danger to the lake was gone, but the healing, that was the part that took time. The weeks that followed moved slower, like the lake was teaching all of us the value of patience. Investigators kept returning, gathering the last bits of evidence. Residents brought food, questions, apologies, and home-baked pies to my porch, each step part of rebuilding a community that had been held hostage for too long. Sheriff Hale stopped by the lodge often, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes with updates, sometimes just to stand by the water and breathe like he hadn't in years. One morning he handed me a document he'd kept folded carefully in his jacket pocket. "State confirmed it," he said quietly. "Your water rights. They're senior and absolute. This lodge is yours, Remy. The lake, too." I unfolded the paper. The seal glinted. The ink shimmered. Every line confirmed what I'd known from Carver's documents, but hadn't dared hope would ever be honored so cleanly. I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot finally releasing. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. He smiled, tired but genuine. "No, thank you. For standing up when the rest of us forgot how." Sarah Mitchell showed up not long after, the attorney whose name had been whispered by neighbors as someone who actually listens. She helped the residents form a new HOA board, transparent, fair, and built on actual community needs rather than control. Dorothy Chen was elected president by unanimous vote. Within 48 hours, she dissolved every fraudulent bylaw Bethany had written. The relief on people's faces was worth more than any victory speech. Sarah visited the lodge frequently during that process, sometimes for legal updates, sometimes for coffee, sometimes because the lake had a way of pulling people toward it when they needed quiet. "You know," she said one morning while sitting on the dock, toes grazing the surface of the water, "the AG's office wants to use this case for statewide reform." I laughed. "A lakeside lodge changing Wyoming? Didn't see that coming." She smiled. "Justice has a way of starting in small places." My SEAL brothers stayed for a while, long enough to see the dust settle, long enough to help rebuild some of what had been torn apart. Ranger repaired fences and docks for neighbors who'd been bullied into neglect. Gideon helped set up cybersecurity protections for the rebuilt HOA. Diesel hosted workshops, teaching residents how to legally defend themselves from overreach. The lodge became more than just a home. It became a place where folks came to breathe again. Veterans started showing up too, one by one, drawn by word of mouth from friends of friends. Some came for a day. Others stayed for weeks. We fished. We built things. We sat in silence by the fire when that was all someone needed. The lake was becoming a haven, just like it had once been for Carver. I made sure his picture hung in the lodge's main hall. A simple frame, a quiet reminder. He didn't live to see justice served, but his fight had saved all of us. 3 months after the arrests, the community held a gathering at the Lakeside Pavilion. Not an emergency meeting this time, a celebration. Kids ran in the grass. Old neighbors hugged each other. The smell of grilled corn and smoked brisket drifted across the water. When Dorothy took the stage, she invited me up beside her. "Remy," she said into the microphone, "you stood alone when the rest of us were too afraid. You gave this lake back to the community." But I shook my head gently. "Carver started this. My brothers carried it. You all finished it." The crowd applauded anyway, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the peace spreading through the faces I saw, the same faces that had once been tight with fear. Bethany Reed was serving her sentence. Jake Mercer, too. And the development firm had been sued into dust by the state. The lake was free, and so were the people living around it. That night, after the celebration faded and the moon rose high above the water, I sat alone on the dock. The boards were dry again. The air smelled like pine and distant rain. The lodge windows glowed warm behind me. This lake would outlive all of us. But for the first time since I arrived, I felt like I was part of its story. Not a target, not a pawn, but a guardian. I whispered into the cool air, a promise carried on the lake's gentle waves. This lake was never yours to take. The water rippled softly, as if agreeing. Justice isn't loud. It's patient, documented, undeniable. And now, finally, it was home again. If you've ever had to stand your ground against folks who pushed too far, drop a simple justice in the comments so we know we're not alone out here. And if you want more stories about land, dignity, and doing what's right, even when it's hard, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be here on the next one.